The fluorescent lights of Boston Logan International Airport cast harsh shadows across Terminal C as Alessandra Romano stood frozen at Gate 23, her boarding pass crumpled in her trembling hand. The announcement for Flight 892 to Miami echoed through the corridor for the third time, but she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She could only stare at the empty space where her husband had been standing 60 seconds ago. The words Marco Castellano had just spoken still hung in the air like shattered glass, cutting her with every replay in her mind. "You're suffocating me, Alessandra. I need you gone. I need space to think without you constantly in my face, questioning everything I do." She had reached for him, her fingers barely grazing his sleeve before he jerked away, as if her touch burned him. "Marco, please. Whatever I do, we can fix it. Just tell me what's wrong." His dark eyes had gone cold, colder than she'd ever seen them in their 2 years of marriage. "What's wrong is that I made a mistake marrying someone who doesn't understand my world. You're not strong enough for this life, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise." "That's not true. I've never asked you to pretend anything." "Final boarding call for Flight 892 to Miami," the gate agent announced, her voice cutting through Alessandra's desperate plea. Marco had looked at the departing passengers, then back at her with an expression that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Get on that plane, Alessandra. Go stay with your sister. Figure out what you want to do with your life. But do it away from me." "You don't mean that." "I mean every word. I've already arranged everything. Your sister knows you're coming. There's money in your account. You'll be fine." The clinical way he discussed the dissolution of their marriage, like he was closing a business deal, had felt more violent than any physical blow. Alessandra had searched his face for any sign of the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who used to look at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. But that man was gone, replaced by this stranger with ice in his voice and cruelty in his eyes. "I love you," she had whispered, one last desperate attempt to reach him. Marco's jaw had clenched, the only sign that her words affected him at all. Then he turned his back on her and walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing against the terminal floor like the final notes of a funeral march. Now Alessandra stood alone as the gate agent made eye contact with her, a silent question in her expression. This was it. The moment where she either boarded the plane and accepted that her marriage was over, or she refused to move and forced Marco to physically remove her from his life. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Pride made the decision for her. Alessandra Romano had never begged for anything in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. If Marco wanted her gone, she would go. But she would do it with her head held high, not as a woman who had been discarded, but as a woman who chose to walk away from someone who didn't deserve her. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent and walked down the jetway on legs that felt like they might collapse at any moment. She didn't look back. She didn't allow herself to hope that Marco would come running after her with apologies and explanations. She simply moved forward because standing still would have destroyed her completely. The plane was a Boeing 737, half full with business travelers and families heading south for warmer weather. Alessandra found her seat near the back, next to a window that looked out onto the tarmac where ground crews were loading luggage. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. 2 years. 2 years of marriage, and it ended in an airport terminal with the casual brutality of someone canceling a subscription they no longer needed. Alessandra closed her eyes and forced herself to remember how it had begun, before everything went wrong. 28 months earlier, the charity gala at the Four Seasons had been her sister Sophia's idea. "You need to get out more," Sophia had insisted. "You work too hard. When was the last time you put on a dress and reminded yourself that you're a beautiful woman in her 20s, not just a CPA buried in spreadsheets?" Alessandra had gone to humor her sister, wearing a simple black dress that Sophia had called criminally understated, and heels that made her feel like she was walking on stilts. She had planned to stay for exactly 1 hour, make a donation to whatever cause was being promoted, and then escape back to her apartment where she could change into pajamas and finish the audit she'd been working on. But then, Marco Castellano had walked into the ballroom, and every plan she'd made evaporated like morning fog. He was tall, easily 6'2", with dark hair that was just slightly too long to be strictly professional, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings with predatory precision. He wore his tuxedo like armor, commanding attention without demanding it, drawing every gaze in the room simply by existing. Sophia had grabbed Alessandra's arm with enough force to bruise. "That's Marco Castellano, real estate development. Half the new construction in Boston has his name on it somewhere." "He looks dangerous," Alessandra had said, unable to look away. "He is dangerous. Also single. Also staring directly at you." Alessandra's eyes had snapped to Marco's face, and she'd found him watching her with an intensity that made her skin flush hot despite the air conditioning. He hadn't smiled, hadn't nodded, just looked at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. When he crossed the ballroom toward her, weaving through clusters of Boston's elite with single-minded purpose, Alessandra had felt her heart begin to race. "Dance with me," he'd said without preamble when he reached her side. Not a question, a statement of intent. "I don't know you," she'd replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Marco Castellano, now you know me. Dance with me." There was something about his absolute confidence that should have annoyed her. Instead, she found herself intrigued by a man who clearly didn't ask for things twice. "Alessandra Romano," she'd said, extending her hand, "and I prefer to be asked, not commanded." For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "Alessandra Romano, would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" "Much better. Yes, I would." That first dance had been electric. Marco moved with a grace that belied his size, leading her through the waltz, with a sure hand at the small of her back. He smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, something that reminded her of midnight and secrets. "What do you do, Alessandra Romano?" he'd asked as they moved across the floor. "I'm a CPA. I audit financial records for small businesses and nonprofits." "Interesting. So you spend your days hunting for discrepancies and patterns that don't add up." "Something like that. What about you? Sophia says you're in real estate development." "Among other things. I build structures that last. I solve problems that other people think are impossible. And I protect what's mine." The way he'd said that last part, with his hand tightening slightly against her back, had sent a shiver through her entire body. They'd talked for hours that night, long after the gala ended and the other guests had departed. Marco had driven her home in his black Mercedes, and they'd sat in front of her apartment building until 3 a.m, discussing everything from architecture to her dreams of starting her own accounting firm someday. "You're different from what I expected," Marco had said, as dawn began to lighten the sky. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to read. You're complicated, Alessandra. Layers and hidden depths. I like that." "And you're exactly what I expected," she'd replied. "Confident to the point of arrogance, used to getting your way, probably impossible to live with." He'd laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face. "Definitely impossible to live with. But I have a feeling you might be one of the few people stubborn enough to try." Their courtship had been intense and consuming. Marco pursued her with the same focused determination he applied to his business ventures, showing up at her office with coffee, calling her at midnight just to hear her voice, planning elaborate dates that showed he'd been paying attention to every casual comment she made about her interests. 6 months later, he'd proposed on the rooftop of a building he owned, with all of Boston spread out beneath them like a promise. "Marry me, Alessandra," he'd said, holding out a ring that must have cost more than her annual salary. "Be my partner in everything. Build a life with me." She should have asked more questions, should have demanded to know exactly what his business involved, why men in expensive suits called him at all hours, why he sometimes came home with bruised knuckles and wouldn't explain where he'd been. But she'd been too in love to care about the warning signs. Too caught up in the intoxicating feeling of being wanted so completely by a man who could have had anyone. "Yes," she'd said, and sealed her fate. The plane shuddered as the engines powered up, pulling Alessandra back to the present. She opened her eyes and stared out the window, watching Boston fade into the distance as they climbed into the darkening sky. The marriage had been good at first, but slowly, things changed. Late-night calls, unexplained absences, a growing distance she couldn't bridge no matter how hard she tried. Tonight had been the breaking point. Marco had come home from work looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single day. When Alessandra asked what was wrong, he'd exploded with a fury that left her reeling. "I can't do this anymore. I can't come home and pretend everything is fine. I can't keep answering questions I don't want to answer. I need space, Alessandra. I need you gone so I can think." She'd tried to stay calm, tried to be reasonable. "If you need space, you can stay at a hotel for a few days, but we need to talk about this like adults, not just run away from our problems." "I'm not running. I'm making a decision that should have been made months ago. You don't belong in my world, and I was foolish to think we could make this work." The words had cut deeper than any blade. Before she could formulate a response, Marco had packed a bag for her, called a car, and handed her a plane ticket he'd apparently purchased hours earlier. "You're going to Miami. Sophia is expecting you. We'll figure out the details later, but right now, I need you gone." And that was how Alessandra Romano found herself on Flight 892, flying toward a sister who probably pitied her, and a future that looked nothing like the life she'd imagined building with Marco. The flight attendant came by with a beverage cart, and Alessandra ordered wine she didn't want. She sipped it slowly, staring out the window at the clouds that looked like mountains of cotton in the fading light. She didn't cry. She'd used up all her tears in the terminal. Now she just felt numb, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her chest and removed everything essential, leaving only the shell of who she used to be. The plane hit turbulence, shaking hard enough that passengers gasped and grabbed their armrests. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and reassuring. "Folks, we're experiencing some unexpected rough air. I'm going to need everyone to return to their seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please take your positions." Alessandra tightened her seatbelt and pressed closer to the window. Outside, lightning split the darkening sky, illuminating massive storm clouds that seemed to tower above and below them simultaneously. The turbulence intensified, the plane dropping suddenly before climbing again with a sickening lurch. Somewhere behind her, a child started crying. An overhead compartment popped open, sending a bag tumbling into the aisle. The captain's voice returned, no longer quite as steady. "Folks, we're going to be diverting our route to avoid the worst of this weather system. Please remain calm and keep your seatbelts fastened. We'll have you safely on the ground as soon as possible." Alessandra thought about Marco, wondered if he was already back in their apartment, relieved to have the space he'd demanded. Wondered if he would even notice if something happened to her flight. Wondered if he would care. The plane shook again, harder this time, and suddenly all the lights went out. 3 hours earlier, Boston Marco Castellano stood in the parking garage of his office building, his phone pressed against his ear with enough force to make his jaw ache. On the other end of the line, Vincent Caruso delivered news that made Marco's blood run cold. "The feds have been building a case for 6 months. They have surveillance on your wife, Marco. Photos of her leaving your house, shopping, going to work. They're planning to approach her next week with an offer of immunity in exchange for testimony. Alessandra doesn't know anything about the business. They don't care. They'll manufacture connections, pressure her into signing statements, threaten her with conspiracy charges until she breaks. And once they flip her, she becomes a liability to everyone in the organization, not just you. Marco closed his eyes, seeing Alessandra's face in his mind. Her quick smile, her sharp intelligence, the way she looked at him like he was capable of being better than he was. What are my options? Vincent's silence spoke volumes. You know what the family does with liabilities, Marco, especially liabilities connected to federal investigations. No. Then you need to create distance. Make it public, make it convincing, make sure everyone, including the feds, knows that she has no value as leverage against you. She's my wife, Vincent. Which is exactly why she's in danger. As long as you're married, as long as she's connected to you, she's a target. But if you cut her loose publicly, if you make it clear she means nothing to you, then she becomes worthless to the investigation. They'll move on to other targets, and she'll be safe. Marco had spent the next 2 hours planning how to destroy his marriage in order to save his wife's life. He bought a plane ticket to Miami, where Alessandra's sister lived. He called Sofia and explained just enough to ensure she would take Alessandra in without asking too many questions. He packed a bag with his wife's clothes, trying not to think about the fact that he was packing away 2 years of shared memories. Then he'd driven to their apartment and delivered the performance of his life, saying things designed to hurt her deeply enough that she would never try to contact him again. Watching her face crumble with every cruel word had been the hardest thing he'd ever done, but he forced himself to continue. Her pain now would keep her alive later. At the airport, he'd walked away from her without looking back, knowing that if he saw the tears in her eyes, he would break. He would tell her everything, and telling her would put her in more danger than ignorance ever could. Now he sat in his car, staring at nothing, trying to convince himself he'd done the right thing. His phone rang. Vincent again. It's done, Marco said before Vincent could speak. She's on the plane. I made it ugly enough that she'll never want to see me again. Good. That's good, Marco. You protected her. I destroyed her. Better destroyed than dead. Marco ended the call and sat in the silence of his car, feeling something essential break apart inside his chest. He'd built an empire on carefully calculated decisions, on knowing when to advance and when to retreat, on understanding that sometimes you had to sacrifice what you wanted in order to protect what you needed. But sitting alone in a parking garage, imagining Alessandra on that plane thinking he'd stopped loving her, Marco wondered if some sacrifices cost too much. His phone buzzed with a text from one of his associates. A routine business update that would normally require his immediate attention. Marco ignored it. He ignored the 3 calls that followed. He sat in his car and stared at his wedding ring, remembering the day Alessandra had slipped it onto his finger with hands that shook slightly with emotion. I promise to be your partner in everything, she'd said, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to love you even when you're impossible to love. He'd broken that promise, shattered it into pieces too small to ever repair. But he'd done it to keep her alive, and that had to be enough. That had to matter. Marco started his engine and drove home to an apartment that would feel empty without her presence. He'd give her a month in Miami to settle in, to start rebuilding her life. Then he'd file for divorce quietly, cleanly, giving her everything she wanted without contest. She'd probably hate him for the rest of her life, but she'd be alive to hate him. That was all that mattered. His phone rang again as he pulled into his parking space. Vincent's name on the screen. Marco almost didn't answer, but years of ingrained habit made him pick up. What now? Turn on the news. Channel 7. Something in Vincent's voice made Marco's stomach drop. He grabbed the tablet from his passenger seat and pulled up the local news station, and his entire world stopped. Breaking news. Flight 892 to Miami loses contact. With air traffic control. The anchor's voice seemed to come from very far away. Boston Logan Airport has confirmed that Flight 892, which departed from Miami at 6:43 this evening, has lost all communication with air traffic control. The flight, carrying 78 passengers and 6 crew members, disappeared from radar approximately 1 hour into its scheduled flight time. Search and rescue operations are currently being coordinated, but officials say the aircraft's last known position was over a remote area of North Carolina where severe weather has been reported. Marco couldn't breathe. The tablet slipped from his numb fingers, clattering against the car floor, but he didn't notice. All he could see was Alessandra's face as he told her to get on that plane. All he could hear was her voice saying, "I love you," moments before he walked away. "Marco!" Vincent's voice came from the phone. "Marco, are you there?" "She's on that plane," Marco said, his voice hollow. "Alessandra is on that plane. We don't know what happened yet. Could be a communication failure, could be. I put her on that plane, I bought the ticket. I forced her to leave. This is my fault." Marco hung up and sat in his car, staring at the dashboard without seeing it. An hour ago, he'd been congratulating himself on making a hard choice to protect his wife. Now that choice might have killed her. His phone exploded with calls, texts, news alerts. Marco ignored all of it. He pulled up the airline's website with shaking hands, searching for any information beyond what the news was reporting. But there was nothing. Just a customer service number that went straight to an automated message saying all representatives were currently busy. Marco drove to the airport on autopilot, navigating through evening traffic without conscious thought. The terminal was chaos when he arrived, families and loved ones crowding around airline desks, demanding information no one could provide. He pushed through the crowd until he reached a harried-looking supervisor. "Flight 892. My wife was on that flight. I need to know what happened." The woman's expression shifted to practiced sympathy. "Sir, I understand your concern. We're doing everything we can to locate the aircraft and establish communication. As soon as we have any information, we'll share it with the families." "That's not good enough. I need to know where she is. I need to know if she's—" Marco couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the word that kept echoing through his mind like a death knell. "Sir, I promise we're doing everything possible. If you can provide your contact information, we'll make sure you're updated immediately when we have news." Marco gave his information mechanically, then found himself standing in the middle of the terminal, surrounded by strangers who were all experiencing the same terrifying uncertainty. A television mounted on the wall showed continuous news coverage. The anchor interviewed an aviation expert who used careful language that couldn't hide the grim reality. After this much time without communication, the possibilities become more limited and more concerning. Marco turned away, unable to listen. He found an empty chair near the windows and sank into it, staring out at the planes that continued to take off and land normally, as if the world hadn't just ended. His phone rang. Vincent again. Marco almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "The surveillance is being pulled," Vincent said without preamble. "Federal task force is redirecting resources to other targets. You're clear, Marco. The threat is over." The threat is over. The words that would have brought relief this morning now felt like mockery. "She's missing, Vincent. The plane she's on is missing. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand. Marco, I'm so sorry. But you need to think clearly about what comes next. There are going to be questions, investigations. You need to be prepared." "I don't care about investigations. I don't care about business. I care about finding my wife." "I know. We all do. I'm mobilizing resources now. If the plane went down, if there are survivors, we'll find them. I promise you that." Marco ended the call and returned to his vigil. Minutes bled into hours. Other families came and went, receiving updates he wasn't privy to. The airline set up a crisis center in a conference room, but Marco couldn't make himself go inside. Couldn't sit with strangers and pretend there was comfort in shared suffering. At 2 in the morning, an airline representative approached him. Her face was professionally neutral, which somehow made everything worse. "Mr. Castellano, the FAA has asked me to inform you that search efforts are being expanded. They've deployed additional aircraft and ground crews to search the last known flight path." "What does that mean? Have they found anything?" "Not yet, sir. But they're hopeful that with expanded resources—" "Stop." Marco's voice came out harsh. "Stop with the corporate speak and the careful language. Tell me the truth. What are the actual chances that she's alive?" The representative hesitated, clearly debating how honest to be. Finally, she said quietly, "After this much time without any communication or emergency signals, the statistical probability of a positive outcome decreases significantly with each passing hour." Marco felt the last of his hope drain away like water through his fingers. "Thank you for your honesty." He left the airport as dawn broke over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene given the circumstances. The world had no right to be beautiful when Alessandra might be dead because of his choices. Marco drove home and sat in the parking garage, unable to make himself go up to an apartment that still held her presence. Her coffee mug in the sink, her jacket hanging by the door, her books scattered across the nightstand, all the small pieces of her life that he'd taken for granted until they were gone. His phone rang with another update. No news. Search continuing. Prayers for the families. Marco closed his eyes and did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He prayed. Not to any specific deity, not with any particular theology, just a desperate plea sent into the void. "Please let her be alive. Please give me the chance to tell her the truth. Please, let me fix this." But the sky remained empty of answers, and Flight 892 remained missing. Marco Castellano looked like a man who had forgotten how to sleep. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally immaculate appearance had deteriorated into wrinkled dress shirts and a 2-day beard. He sat in the airline's crisis center, surrounded by other families who were slowly accepting what Marco refused to believe. Flight 892 was gone. The official search had been scaled back after 72 hours. The FAA released careful statements about limited hope and realistic expectations. Debris had been spotted in a forested area of North Carolina, scattered across miles of dense wilderness. Recovery crews were working to reach the site, but the terrain was brutal, and weather conditions kept hampering their efforts. Vincent had tried to convince Marco to go home, to rest, to let the professionals handle the search. But Marco couldn't leave. Leaving felt like abandoning Alessandra when she needed him most. "Mr. Castellano?" A woman in an airline uniform approached, her expression carefully composed. "Could you come with me, please? We have an update." Marco's heart stopped. He'd received updates before, but something about her tone was different. He followed her to a private office where a man in a FAA jacket waited with a tablet in his hands. "Mr. Castellano, I'm Robert Hayes with the Federal Aviation Administration. I need to share some information with you, but I want to be clear that the situation is still developing." "Just tell me," Marco said, his voice raw. "Is she alive?" Hayes pulled up an image on his tablet. "We've located the aircraft. It made an emergency landing in a remote area near the North Carolina-Tennessee border. The plane is intact, and we have visual confirmation of survivors." The word survivors hit Marco like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. "How many? How many survivors?" "We believe all passengers and crew survived the landing, but we won't have accurate information until rescue teams reach the site. The area is extremely remote. accessible only by helicopter or on foot through difficult terrain. That's why it's taken us this long to locate them. When can I see her? When can I get to her? We're coordinating evacuation now. Weather has been our biggest challenge, but conditions are improving. We expect to begin airlifting passengers within the next 6 to 12 hours. Marco forced himself to breathe, to process what he was hearing. Alessandra was alive. She'd survived 4 days in the wilderness, probably terrified, probably hurt, definitely thinking that her husband had abandoned her without a second thought. "I need to be there when she arrives," Marco said. "I don't care what it takes. I need to see her the moment she lands." Hayes nodded. "We're bringing all passengers to Asheville Regional Airport. I can arrange for you to be there." "Do it. And Hayes, thank you. Thank you for not giving up." After Hayes left to make arrangements, Marco stood alone in the small office and let himself feel the full weight of relief. She was alive. Against all odds, against all the statistics and dire predictions, Alessandra had survived. But as the initial wave of relief faded, a new kind of fear took its place. She'd survived the crash, but she'd done it thinking he didn't love her. She'd spent 4 days facing death while believing that her husband had discarded her like she meant nothing. How could he possibly explain what he'd done? How could he make her understand that every cruel word had been a lie designed to protect her? Marco pulled out his phone and called Vincent. "She's alive," he said, without preamble. "They found the plane. She's alive, Vincent." "Thank God. Marco, that's incredible news." "I need you to do something for me, the federal investigation, the surveillance, all of it. I need to know it's completely over. I need documentation, proof that the threat no longer exists." "Why?" "Marco, you're clear. The feds moved on weeks ago." "Because I'm going to tell her everything. She deserves to know the truth about why I sent her away, and I need to be able to prove that she's safe now." Vincent was quiet for a moment. "You're sure about this? Once you tell her about the family business, about the investigation, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure. She almost died, Vincent. She spent 4 days thinking I'd stopped loving her. I'm done with secrets and protection through ignorance. If we're going to have any chance of fixing this, it starts with the truth." "All right. I'll pull together everything you need. But Marco, be prepared for the possibility that even the truth might not be enough. You hurt her badly." "I know, but I have to try." Asheville Regional Airport, 18 hours later. The helicopter touched down just after sunset, its rotors whipping up dust and debris as medical personnel rushed forward with gurneys and equipment. Marco stood behind a security barrier with other families, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Survivors began emerging from the helicopter, most walking with assistance, some on stretchers. Marco scanned each face desperately, searching for Alessandra among the exhausted and disheveled passengers. Then he saw her. She was near the end of the group, walking slowly but under her own power. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled around her face. There was a bandage on her left arm and what looked like bruising along her jaw, but she was alive. She was standing. She was here. "Alessandra!" Marco shouted, pushing forward against the barrier. She turned at the sound of her name, and when her eyes found his, Marco saw something that made his chest constrict. Not relief, not joy. Just a flat, exhausted recognition followed immediately by something that looked like pain. Alessandra turned away and continued walking toward the medical triage area without acknowledging him further. Marco ducked under the security barrier, ignoring the protests of airport staff, and ran to catch up with her. "Alessandra, please, I need to talk to you." She kept walking, her jaw set in a line he recognized. This was her armor, the protective shell she wore when she was hurt, and determined not to show it. "Ma'am, are you with this gentleman?" a medic asked, gesturing to Marco. "No." Alessandra said flatly. I don't know him. The words hit Marco like a knife between the ribs. Alessandra, don't do this. Please. Just give me 5 minutes to explain. She finally stopped walking and turned to face him. Up close, Marco could see the full extent of her ordeal. The bruises were darker than he'd thought, spreading from her jaw down her neck. Her eyes were bloodshot, ringed with the kind of exhaustion that came from days of surviving on adrenaline and fear. Explain what, Marco? How you told me I wasn't strong enough for your world? How you said marrying me was a mistake? How you put me on a plane and walked away without looking back? All of that. Everything. Just give me a chance. A medic interrupted, touching Alessandra's shoulder gently. Ma'am, we really need to get you checked out. You've been through severe trauma. I'm fine, Alessandra said, though her voice wavered slightly. I just want to go to my sister's house. You need medical evaluation first, the medic insisted. Hospital policy for all survivors. Alessandra looked like she wanted to argue, but her body chose that moment to betray her. She swayed on her feet, and Marco instinctively reached out to steady her. She flinched away from his touch like it burned. Don't touch me. You need to sit down. You're exhausted. What I need is for you to leave me alone. But her legs gave out before she could take another step. Marco caught her, and this time she didn't have the strength to pull away. He lifted her carefully, mindful of her injuries, and carried her to the nearest gurney despite her weak protests. Put me down, Marco. I don't need your help. Too bad. You're getting it anyway. The medics took over, checking her vital signs and asking questions about pain levels and injuries sustained in the crash. Marco stood back but didn't leave, watching as they worked with an intensity that made his chest ache. Mr. Castellano? A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. Are you Mrs. Castellano's husband? Yes. She's showing signs of dehydration, exhaustion, and possible mild hypothermia. We need to transport her to Mission Hospital for a full evaluation. Are you riding with her? Marco looked at Alessandra, who was staring at the ceiling with tears streaming silently down her face. Ask her. The doctor turned to Alessandra. Ma'am, would you like your husband to accompany you? He's not my husband anymore, Alessandra said, her voice hollow. He made that very clear at the airport. Alessandra, I want my sister, Sophia. Her number is in my phone. Alessandra gestured weakly to a clear bag containing her personal effects. Call her, not him. The doctor looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic drama unfolding in his emergency triage. Sir, perhaps it would be best if you— I'm not leaving, Marco said with quiet finality. She can hate me. She can refuse to talk to me, but I'm not leaving her alone. They loaded Alessandra into an ambulance and Marco followed in his car, maintaining a careful distance but never losing sight of the vehicle carrying his wife. At the hospital, he watched from the waiting room as they took her for tests and examinations. He called Sophia and explained enough that she understood she needed to come to North Carolina immediately. Hours passed. Marco sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair and stared at the institutional beige walls, trying to figure out how to fix something he'd broken so completely. Vincent called with updates on the business. Marcus needed decisions about a property acquisition. There were contracts waiting for signatures, meetings that required his presence. Marco ignored all of it. Finally, a nurse emerged and approached him. Mr. Castellano? Your wife is stable. She has some bruised ribs, dehydration, and minor lacerations, but nothing life-threatening. We're keeping her overnight for observation. Can I see her? The nurse hesitated. She's asked that you not be admitted to her room. I understand. Can you at least tell her that I'm here? That I'm not leaving? I'll let her know. Marco settled in for a long night. He bought terrible coffee from a vending machine and tried not to think about Alessandra lying in a hospital bed, probably still believing he'd stopped loving her. Around midnight, Sophia arrived in a whirlwind of fury and designer luggage. She spotted Marco immediately and crossed the waiting room with murder in her eyes. "You bastard!" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You sent her away. You broke her heart and put her on a plane that crashed, and now you have the audacity to sit here like you care? Sophia, I know you're angry." "Angry? I'm furious. Alessandra called me from the airport crying so hard she could barely speak. She told me you said marrying her was a mistake. What kind of man does that to his wife?" Marco stood to face her, and Sophia saw something in his expression that made her anger falter slightly. He looked wrecked, destroyed in a way she'd never seen from the always controlled Marco Castellano. The kind of man who was trying to keep her alive, Marco said quietly. The kind of man who made the worst decision of his life because he thought it was the only way to protect her. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Sophia studied his face, her anger shifting to confusion. "What are you talking about? Protect her from what? Can we sit down? This is going to take a while." They found a quiet corner of the waiting room, and Marco told Sophia everything: the federal investigation, the surveillance, the impossible choice he'd been forced to make. "So you destroyed your marriage to save her life?" Sophia asked when he finished. "I thought I was saving her life. Instead, I put her on a plane that almost killed her anyway." Marco's voice broke. "She spent 4 days thinking I'd abandoned her, Sophia. 4 days facing death while believing I didn't love her. How do I come back from that?" "I don't know if you can," Sophia said honestly. "Marco, what you did, even with good intentions, the damage might be too deep. I have to try. I can't lose her because I was too afraid to fight for us." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, studying Marco's face. Finally, she said, "She's going to need time. A lot of time. You can't just tell her the truth and expect everything to be fixed." "I know. And she might decide that even with the truth, she can't trust you again. You have to be prepared for that possibility." "I know that too. But I have to try." Sophia stood. "I'm going to see her now. You should go home. Get some rest. She's not going to be ready to talk to you tonight." "I'm not leaving the hospital. Marco, I'm not leaving, Sophia. She can refuse to see me, but I'm staying here where I can make sure she's safe." Sophia recognized the stubborn determination in his voice. She'd seen it before in Alessandra. That same absolute refusal to back down once a decision was made. Maybe that was why they'd worked so well together, both of them too stubborn to quit even when quitting would be easier. "Fine. But if she asks me to make you leave, I will." "Understood." Sophia disappeared down the corridor toward Alessandra's room. Marco returned to his uncomfortable chair and settled in for the night, hoping that come morning, his wife would give him the chance to explain everything he should have said before he sent her away. 3 days later, Alessandra was discharged with instructions to rest, stay hydrated, and follow up with her primary care physician. Sophia had arranged for them to stay at a hotel near the hospital, a neutral space where Alessandra could recover, without the pressure of returning immediately to Miami. Marco knew because he'd paid for the hotel. He also knew Alessandra would be furious if she found out, but he didn't care. He'd been maintaining a careful distance for 3 days, giving her space while making sure she had everything she needed. He'd had her favorite foods delivered to the hotel room, had arranged for a massage therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, had handled all the medical bills and insurance paperwork without making a big production of it. He was taking care of her from the shadows, the only way she'd currently allow. On the 4th day, Sophia called him. "She wants to see you." Marco's heart stopped. "When?" "Now. At the hotel." "But Marco, she's not—" "Don't expect this to be a reconciliation. She just wants answers." Answers I can give her. Marco drove to the hotel with his heart in his throat. He'd prepared for this conversation for days, rehearsing what he would say, how he would explain. But now that the moment was here, all his careful planning evaporated like morning mist. Sophia met him in the lobby. Room 412. I'll be in the hotel restaurant if either of you needs me. And Marco? Don't make this worse. I'll try not to. Marco took the elevator to the 4th floor, his palms sweating like he was heading into a business negotiation where everything was at stake. Which, in a way, he was. He knocked on room 412, and Alessandra's voice called out, "It's open." She was sitting in an armchair by the window, wearing jeans and a soft sweater that Sophia must have brought. She looked better than she had at the hospital, the color returning to her face, the bruises fading to yellow and green. But there was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a wariness that broke Marco's heart. "Hi," he said, suddenly feeling like every word he'd planned had fled his brain. "Hi." Alessandra gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." Marco sat, feeling like he was facing a judge who held his entire future in her hands. "Sophia told me some of what you told her," Alessandra said without preamble, "about the federal investigation and the threats. I want to hear it from you. All the details she couldn't give me. No edited versions. Complete honesty." "Agreed." Marco took a deep breath and continued where Sophia's explanation had left off, filling in the details about the surveillance photos, the conspiracy charges they'd planned to threaten her with, and Vincent's stark warning. "They were going to use you against me," Marco said. "And if you refused to cooperate, or if you became compromised by agreeing to work with them, the family would have seen you as a liability. Vincent made it very clear what happens to liabilities in our world." Alessandra's face had gone pale. "They would have killed me?" "Not immediately, not directly. But accidents happen. People disappear. I couldn't take that risk. So you decided to break my heart instead. I decided to make you worthless as leverage. If you meant nothing to me, if our marriage was publicly over, then the feds would have no reason to approach you, and the family would have no reason to see you as a threat." Alessandra was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd told her. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth? Why not explain the danger and let me make my own choice about how to handle it?" "Because telling you would have put you in more danger. If the feds knew that you knew about the investigation, they could have charged you with obstruction. And if the family thought you had information about our operations, you would have become an even bigger liability. So you made a choice for both of us. You decided what I could handle, what I was strong enough to survive." It was almost exactly what Lena had said to Dante in the inspiration video, and hearing those words from Alessandra's mouth made Marco realize just how badly he'd miscalculated. "Yes," he admitted, "and I was wrong. Not about protecting you, but about how I did it. I should have trusted you enough to face the problem together." "Yes, you should have." Alessandra's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking slightly. "Marco, do you understand what you did to me? You made me believe that everything we'd built together meant nothing. You made me get on that plane thinking I'd failed as a wife, that I wasn't strong enough for your world, that you'd stopped loving me. I know, and I'm sorrier than I can possibly express. Sorry isn't enough." Tears were streaming down Alessandra's face now, though her voice remained controlled. "When that plane went down, when we were falling through the sky and I thought I was going to die, all I could think about was you. About how I'd never get the chance to understand what went wrong. About how I'd die believing you didn't love me." Marco felt his own eyes burning. "Alessandra, let me finish. We crashed in the middle of nowhere. It was dark and cold, and people were hurt and scared. For 4 days, I helped the flight attendants care for injured passengers. I rationed food and water. I kept people calm when they panicked. And the whole time, I kept thinking about what you said. That I wasn't strong enough for your world. You're the strongest person I know. Am I? Because I don't feel strong, Marco. I feel broken. I survived a plane crash, but I'm not sure I survived what you did to me at the airport. The words hung between them, brutal in their honesty. Marco leaned forward, his hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. I can't undo what I did. I can't take back the words I said or the pain I caused. But I can tell you that every word was a lie. Every single cruel thing I said was the opposite of what I actually felt. How am I supposed to trust that? How am I supposed to believe anything you say when you lied so convincingly before? I don't know. But I'm going to spend however long it takes showing you that you're the most important thing in my world. More important than my business. More important than my safety. More important than anything. Alessandra wiped her eyes, and Marco saw something shift in her expression. Not forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of understanding. The federal investigation, she said. Is it really over? Marco pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. Vincent compiled everything. The surveillance was called off 4 days before the crash. The task force moved on to other targets. You're clear, Alessandra. The threat that made me send you away no longer exists. She opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside. Official memos, surveillance reports marked as closed, reassignment orders for the agents who had been watching her. Proof that Marco was telling the truth. So I could have stayed, she said quietly. If you'd just waited a few more days, none of this would have been necessary. I didn't know they were pulling the surveillance. Vincent only found out after I'd already sent you away. By then, it was too late. Alessandra set the envelope aside and looked at Marco with eyes that had seen too much in the past week. I need you to understand something. Even knowing the truth, even understanding why you did it, I'm not sure I can just forgive and forget. You broke something between us, Marco. You showed me that when things get difficult, your instinct is to push me away rather than include me. I know. And I want the chance to prove that I can change, that I can learn to trust you with the truth instead of trying to protect you from it. That's going to take time. A lot of time. I have time. As much as you need. Alessandra stood and walked to the window, staring out at the North Carolina mountains in the distance. The crash changed me. Sitting in that wreckage, not knowing if rescue was coming, wondering if I'd die in the middle of nowhere because of a choice you made. It put everything in perspective. What kind of perspective? She turned to face him. I don't want to live my life being protected from the truth. I don't want to be your wife in name only while you handle all the difficult things alone. If we're going to make this marriage work, it has to be as actual partners. Equal partners who face problems together, even when those problems include federal investigations and family threats. Marco stood, hope flickering in his chest for the first time in days. Equal partners. I can do that. Can you? Because it means telling me things even when you think it might scare me. It means including me in decisions about our life, our future, our safety. It means trusting that I'm strong enough to handle whatever comes, instead of making choices for me because you think you know what's best. I can do that, Marco repeated. I want to do that. Alessandra, you are strong enough. You've always been strong enough. I was just too afraid to admit it because admitting it meant accepting that I couldn't control every danger in your life. Alessandra studied his face for a long moment. I'm not ready to come home yet. I need time away from Boston, from your world, from everything that happened. I need space to figure out if I can really trust you again. Marco's heart sank, but he forced himself to nod. I understand. How much time? I don't know. Weeks, maybe months. I'll stay with Sophia in Miami for a while. Go to therapy. Process what happened on that plane and what happened at the airport. Can I visit? Can we talk? Maybe, eventually. But Marco, if I give you another chance, it's the last one. There are no more catastrophic mistakes. No more lies to protect me. No more decisions made without me. If you can't promise me that, then we should just end this now. I promise, Marco said with absolute conviction. No more secrets. No more protection through ignorance. We face everything together from now on, or we don't face it at all. Alessandra nodded slowly. Okay, then we'll try. But Marco, this isn't a reconciliation. This is a probation. You have to earn back my trust, and that's going to take more than apologies and explanations. I know. And I will. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll prove to you that you can trust me again. She walked past him toward the door, and for a moment Marco thought she was asking him to leave. Instead, she stopped and turned back. Thank you for paying for the hotel, and the food, and the medical bills, and whatever else you've been doing from the shadows. Sophia told me everything. You're my wife. Taking care of you isn't optional even when you're angry with me. I'm more than angry, Marco. I'm hurt. There's a difference. I know. And I'm going to spend every day working to heal that hurt. Alessandra opened the door. Go home to Boston. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk again. Marco wanted to argue, wanted to stay close enough to make sure she was safe, but he forced himself to respect her boundaries. This was what she needed, and giving her what she needed was how he would prove he'd changed. I love you, Alessandra, he said before leaving. I never stopped loving you, not for a single second. I know, she said softly. That's the only reason I'm giving you this chance. 6 weeks later, Miami Alessandra sat in her therapist's office, discussing trust and betrayal and the complicated nature of loving someone who made catastrophic mistakes with good intentions. He says he wants to change, she told Dr. Martinez, that he wants to include me instead of protecting me. But how do I know he won't just revert to his old patterns when the next crisis happens? You don't, Dr. Martinez said simply. Trust is always a risk. The question is whether you believe he's capable of change, and whether the possibility of a healthy relationship is worth taking that risk. Alessandra thought about the phone calls she and Marco had been having. They talked every few days, careful conversations where they were both trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of what they'd had before. Marco told her about his business, the legitimate and the questionable parts. He asked her opinion on decisions he was facing. He sent her financial records and explained things he'd previously hidden. It was slow work, rebuilding trust, but it was work they were both doing together. I think I'm ready to see him in person, Alessandra said. Not in Boston yet, but maybe here, in Miami, neutral territory where I have control. What changed? Dr. Martinez asked. I realized that I'm not afraid of him hurting me again. I'm afraid of making the same mistake twice, of trusting someone who isn't trustworthy. But Marco's been consistent for 6 weeks. He hasn't pushed, he hasn't demanded. He's respected every boundary I've set while still showing up in the ways that matter. So you believe he's capable of change? I believe he's trying to change, which is all anyone can really ask for. That evening, Alessandra called Marco. Hi, she said when he answered on the first ring. Hi, how are you? Better, stronger. Ready to see you if you're willing to come to Miami. She could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. When? This weekend. Sophia said you can stay at her place. We'll spend time together. Really talk. See if we can find our way back to each other. Alessandra, I'll be on the next flight. Marco, wait. Before you come, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who got on that plane. The crash changed me. Thinking I was going to die changed me. I'm not going to just slip back into being your wife, like nothing happened. I don't want you to. I want to get to know the person you are now. The person who survived a plane crash and came out stronger on the other side. Alessandra smiled despite herself. Okay, then come to Miami. Let's see if we can build something new together. Marco Castellano stood on the balcony of Sophia's guest house, watching the sun rise over Biscayne Bay. He'd been in Miami for 2 weeks now, the longest continuous time he'd spent away from Boston in years. Vincent was managing operations back home, and for once, Marco didn't feel the compulsive need to micromanage every decision. He was learning to let go, learning to trust, learning that the world didn't fall apart when he wasn't personally holding it together. Inside, he could hear Alessandra moving around the kitchen, making coffee. They'd fallen into a tentative routine over the past 2 weeks. Breakfast together, long walks on the beach, dinners where they talked about everything from his business dealings to her plans for the future. They were learning each other all over again, building a foundation stronger than the one they'd had before. "You're up early," Alessandra said, stepping onto the balcony with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one and leaned against the railing beside him. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." "Want to talk about it?" Marco looked at her, really looked at her. The bruises from the crash had long since faded, but there were other changes. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that came from surviving something that should have killed her. Her eyes held a depth they hadn't before, the kind of wisdom that came from confronting mortality and choosing to keep living anyway. "I've been thinking about Boston," he said, "about what happens when we go back." "Are we going back?" "I want to. But only if you want to. Only if you feel ready." Alessandra sipped her coffee, considering. "I miss our home. I miss my business, my clients. But I'm afraid that going back means falling into old patterns. You getting consumed by work, me feeling invisible, both of us pretending everything is fine when it's not. It won't be like that. I promise you, Alessandra, it won't be like that." "How can you be sure?" Marco set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "Because I've made changes. Real, permanent changes. I've stepped back from the more dangerous aspects of the business. I've put Vincent and Marcus in charge of operations that used to consume all my time, and I've told the family that my marriage comes first, before any deal, before any territory dispute, before everything." Alessandra's eyes widened slightly. "You told the family that?" "I did. Last week, conference call with all the senior members. I made it very clear that if they have a problem with my priorities, they can find someone else to run operations in Boston." "Marco, that's huge. What did they say?" "My uncle wasn't happy. He gave me a lecture about loyalty and duty. But at the end of the day, they need me more than I need them. And I made it clear that the price of my continued leadership is acceptance that my wife is not negotiable." Alessandra felt tears prick her eyes. "You risked everything for me." "No, I risked my position in an organization that values power over people. You, us, that's not a risk. That's the only thing worth protecting." She set down her own coffee and moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the coconut scent of her shampoo. "I want to go home, Marco. I want to try again. For real this time." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. But we do it differently. We're partners in everything, not just in name. That means I know about the business, the legitimate parts, and the gray areas. That means when problems come up, we face them together instead of you making unilateral decisions to protect me." "Equal partners," Marco agreed. "In everything." Alessandra reached up and touched his face, the first truly intimate gesture she'd initiated since the crash. "I still love you, you know. Even after everything, even with all the hurt and the anger and the betrayal, I never stopped loving you." Marco closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle over him like a benediction. "I love you too. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Then let's go home. Let's build the life we should have built from the beginning." Marco pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in months, Alessandra melted into his embrace without reservation. They stood on the balcony as the sun climbed, higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, both of them understanding that this was a new beginning, not a return to what was. Boston. 1 week later, the penthouse looked exactly as Alessandra remembered it, but somehow different. Maybe it was her that had changed, making everything appear through a new lens. Marco had arranged for fresh flowers in every room, and their wedding photo, the one that had been tucked away in a drawer, now sat prominently on the mantel. "Welcome home," Marco said softly as Alessandra walked through the space, reacquainting herself with rooms she'd once known by heart. "It feels different," she said. "Or maybe I feel different. Both, probably." Marco set down her suitcases. "Alessandra, before we fully settle back in, there's something I want to show you." He led her to his home office, the room that had always been off-limits during their marriage. She'd respected his privacy, never questioning why he kept it locked even from her. Now he opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, shelves lined with books on business and strategy. But what surprised her was the addition of a second desk, positioned adjacent to his own. "What's this?" she asked. "Your desk. If you want it. I thought maybe you could run your accounting firm from here sometimes. That way we're working in the same space, building our businesses side by side." Alessandra moved to the new desk, running her fingers over the smooth surface. It was a beautiful piece, clearly expensive, positioned so that she and Marco could see each other while they worked. "This is perfect," she said. "But Marco, won't it be a problem if I see things related to your other business?" "No more other business. Not the kind that requires secrets anyway. Vincent and I have been working on transitioning everything to legitimate operations. It's going to take time, probably a year or more, but we're getting out of anything that would require me to lie to you or put you in danger." Alessandra turned to face him. "That's a massive undertaking. Your family isn't going to be happy." "My family will adjust. And if they don't, I'll deal with it. But I meant what I said in Miami. You come first. Our life together comes first. Everything else is just details." She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. "Thank you. For changing. For trying. For not giving up on us even when I'd given up." "I'll never give up on us," Marco promised. "No matter what comes, we face it together." 4 months later, Alessandra sat in their home office, reviewing quarterly reports for one of her nonprofit clients, when Marco's phone rang. She'd learned to recognize the different tones of his business calls, the routine check-ins, the urgent problems, the dangerous situations that still occasionally arose despite his efforts to transition away from criminal operations. This call was the third kind. Marco's expression darkened as he listened, his jaw clenching in that way that meant someone had made a serious mistake. "When?" he asked sharply. "How many men? What are they demanding?" Alessandra set down her pen, her full attention on her husband now. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Marco said. "No, don't engage until I arrive. That's an order, Vincent." He ended the call and immediately started reaching for his jacket, that old instinct to handle problems alone kicking in automatically. Then he stopped, remembering his promise. He looked at Alessandra, conflict clear in his expression. "There's a situation," he said. "The Rossi family is making a move on one of our properties downtown. Vincent says they have armed men on site, threatening our people." "How dangerous is it?" Alessandra asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Potentially very. The Rossis have been looking for an excuse to start a war ever since we began transitioning out of their business territories. This could escalate quickly." "Then you need to go handle it." Marco hesitated. "Alessandra, This is exactly the kind of situation where I'd normally just leave without explanation, but I promised you transparency. And I appreciate that. So tell me, what's your plan? How are you going to de-escalate this without anyone getting hurt? Marco blinked, surprised by her question. She wasn't asking him not to go or demanding he stay safe. She was asking about strategy, treating this like a problem they were solving together even though she wouldn't be physically present. I'm going to offer them a deal, he said. The property they want, they can have it. It's not worth bloodshed. But they have to understand that this doesn't set a precedent. They get this one concession, and in return, they back off our other holdings. Will they accept that? If I make it clear that the alternative is a war they can't win, yes, the Rossis are aggressive, but they're not stupid. They'll take the win and walk away. Alessandra stood and crossed to him, straightening his collar in a gesture that was both intimate and practical. Then go. Handle it. But Marco? Yeah? Call me when it's over. I don't need details if you can't share them, but I need to know you're safe. Marco cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. I love you. And I promise, I'll come home. You better. We have dinner reservations at 7. He smiled despite the tension of the situation. Wouldn't miss it. After Marco left, Alessandra tried to return to her work, but concentration was impossible. She kept checking her phone, watching the minutes crawl by, imagining worst-case scenarios despite her best efforts to stay calm. This was what it meant to be married to Marco Castellano, not the sanitized version she'd experienced before, where he kept her carefully separated from the dangers of his world, but the real thing, knowing when he was walking into potentially violent situations, understanding that some nights he might not come home, living with the reality that his business, even as it transitioned toward legitimacy, still operated in shadows where violence was sometimes the only language people understood. Was she strong enough for this? Could she build a life knowing that danger was always lurking at the edges? Her phone rang exactly 47 minutes after Marco left. She answered before the first ring finished. I'm fine, Marco said immediately. Everything's fine. The Rossis accepted the deal, and everyone walked away intact. Alessandra exhaled the breath she'd been holding. Thank God. I was imagining all kinds of terrible scenarios. I know, and I'm sorry you had to worry, but Alessandra, I need you to know something. Having you in my head during that negotiation, knowing you were waiting for me to come home, it made me negotiate better, smarter. I wasn't operating from ego or pride. I was operating from a desire to resolve the situation and get back to my wife. So what you're saying is that being honest about the dangerous parts of your life actually makes you better at handling them. Apparently so. Who knew? Alessandra laughed despite herself. I knew. That's why I insisted on transparency, remember? You were right. About everything. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Don't start dinner without me. 8 months after the crash, Alessandra stood in their bathroom, staring at the pregnancy test in her hand with a mixture of joy and terror. 2 pink lines. Clear and unmistakable. She and Marco had talked about children, but always in abstract terms. Someday. Eventually. When the time was right. Apparently, the time was right now. She heard Marco come home, heard him calling her name as he moved through the apartment. She took a deep breath and walked out to meet him, the test hidden behind her back. Hey, she said, trying to keep her voice casual. How was your day? Marco studied her face, that predatory instinct of his immediately picking up that something was different. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's very right. But I need you to sit down. Alessandra, you're scaring me. Sit down. He sat on the edge of their bed, and Alessandra could see the tension in every line of his body. He was preparing himself for bad news, his mind probably racing through every possible catastrophe. She pulled the test from behind her back and held it out to him. Marco stared at it for a long moment, his expression completely unreadable. Then his eyes snapped up to hers, and she saw something that made her breath catch. Not fear, not uncertainty, pure, uncomplicated joy. "We're having a baby?" His voice was rough with emotion. "We're having a baby." Marco stood and crossed to her in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his size. "Alessandra, God, Alessandra, this is... I don't even have words." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel the answer in the way. He was holding her. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, elated, grateful, overwhelmed, all of that and more. He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy?" "I'm scared," she admitted. "Bringing a baby into your world, into our complicated life. Is that fair to them? We'll make it fair. We'll build a life where our child is safe and loved and never has to question whether they're our priority. Because they will be, along with you. My 2 most important people." Alessandra felt tears streaming down her face. "I thought I couldn't get pregnant. After the crash, after all the trauma my body went through. The doctors said it might not be possible. But it is possible. You're here, I'm here, and we're going to have a baby together. Alessandra, do you have any idea what a gift this is? After everything we've been through, after almost losing you, to get this chance?" They held each other in their bedroom, both of them crying and laughing and trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. A baby. A future. A family built on truth instead of secrets. On partnership instead of control. "We need to tell Sophia," Alessandra said. "She's going to lose her mind." "We need to tell Vincent and Marcus. They're going to need to increase security." Alessandra pulled back and gave him a stern look. "Marco Castellano, we are not turning our child into a prisoner because of your business." "I'm not suggesting that. But increased security is reasonable, especially given the transition we're in the middle of. Some families aren't happy about our move toward legitimacy. Until we're completely clear of the criminal elements, we need to be smart." "Okay. Smart I can agree with. Paranoid fortress living I cannot. Deal. Smart security measures only." 16 months after the crash, the nursery was painted in soft yellows and greens, with a window that overlooked the Boston skyline. Alessandra sat in the rocking chair, cradling their 3-month-old daughter Isabella against her chest. The baby was finally asleep after a fussy evening, her tiny face peaceful in a way that made Alessandra's heart ache with love. Marco appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled from a long day of meetings. When he saw his wife and daughter, his entire expression softened into something that still took Alessandra's breath away even after all this time. "Is she finally down?" he whispered. "Just barely. Another 5 minutes and we can put her in the crib." Marco crossed the room quietly and knelt beside the rocking chair, reaching out to gently touch Isabella's soft, dark hair. "She's perfect." "She is," Alessandra agreed, "though she definitely has your stubborn streak. She fought sleep for 2 solid hours." "Smart girl. Why sleep when you can be awake experiencing the world?" They sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, both of them watching their daughter sleep with the kind of fierce devotion that only parents understood. "Vincent called today," Marco said quietly. "The last of the criminal operations have been officially transferred. We're completely legitimate now. Everything we own, every business we run, it's all above board." Alessandra looked at him with shining eyes. "Really? It's finally done?" "It's done. Took longer than we expected, and it cost us more than we wanted to pay. But it's finished. Isabella is going to grow up in a family that doesn't operate in the shadows." "How do you feel about it?" Marco considered the question carefully. "Relieved. Proud. A little scared about what it means for my relationship with the family, but confident that we made the right choice. Your uncle? Still not happy. Probably never will be. But he's accepted that this is my decision. And he's backed off the pressure. I think having Isabella helped. Even he understands protecting your children. Alessandra stood carefully and placed Isabella in her crib, tucking a soft blanket around their sleeping daughter. Then she turned to Marco and took his hand. Come with me. I want to show you something. She led him to the home office they now shared, to a folder she'd been compiling for weeks. Inside were documents, financial projections, business plans. What's this? Marco asked. A proposal. I've been thinking about expanding my firm, focusing specifically on helping small businesses in underserved communities. Teaching financial literacy, providing affordable accounting services, creating opportunities for people who don't usually have access to them. Marco scanned the documents, his expression growing more impressed with each page. This is ambitious. You're talking about opening offices in 3 different cities, hiring a full staff, creating a nonprofit arm to handle the educational programming. I am. And I'm talking about using some of our money to fund it. Money that came from sources we're not proud of, put towards something that actually helps people. Understanding dawned in Marco's eyes. You want to use the profits from my criminal enterprise to fund community development. I want to take something dark and transform it into something that brings light. Is that too idealistic? It's perfect. Marco set down the documents and pulled Alessandra into his arms. It's absolutely perfect, and we're going to do it. Whatever resources you need, whatever support, it's yours. Even if it means publicly attaching the Castellano name to community outreach programs, some people might find that hypocritical given your history. Let them. People can think whatever they want. I know the truth about what we've built together, about the family we're creating. That's what matters. They stood in their office, holding each other as moonlight streamed through the windows, both of them understanding that they'd finally arrived at the place they'd been trying to reach all along. Not a perfect life, but an honest one. Not a marriage without scars, but one that had been strengthened by surviving the wounds. 2 years after the crash, the Romano Castellano Community Development Center opened on a Tuesday morning in October, in a neighborhood that had seen more than its share of economic hardship. Alessandra stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony with Isabella on her hip, surrounded by city officials, community leaders, and the people they were there to serve. Marco stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back in a gesture that had become automatic over their years together. He'd left his suit jacket in the car and rolled up his sleeves, looking more approachable than he ever had in his previous life as an intimidating crime boss. Thank you all for coming, Alessandra said when it was her turn to speak. This center represents something my husband and I believe deeply in: the power of second chances, the power of transformation, the power of taking your past and using it to build a better future. She looked at Marco, who smiled at her with pride and love shining in his eyes. 2 years ago, I survived a plane crash that should have killed me. I spent 4 days in the wilderness thinking about all the things I'd never get to do, all the dreams I'd never get to pursue. When I was rescued, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't waste the second chance I'd been given. This center is part of keeping that promise. The crowd applauded, and Isabella clapped her chubby hands together, not understanding but enjoying the noise. Alessandra kissed her daughter's forehead and continued, "We're here to provide resources, education, and support to anyone who needs it. No judgment, no barriers, no requirements, beyond a willingness to work toward building a better life. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Everyone deserves the opportunity to transform their circumstances." After the ceremony, as they toured the facility and met with future clients, Sophia appeared at Alessandra's side. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "You took something terrible and turned it into something beautiful." "We did," Alessandra corrected, gesturing to Marco, who was across the room, explaining financial planning concepts to a group of interested participants. Both of us, together. He's different, Sophia observed. Not just in obvious ways, but fundamentally. The man who sent you away at that airport, he's gone. This Marco is someone new. He's not new. He's just finally the person he was always capable of being. He just needed a reason to become that person. And you were that reason. Alessandra shifted Isabella to her other hip and smiled. We were each other's reason. That's what partnership means. As the afternoon wore on and the center filled with people eager to learn, eager to change, eager to build better futures for themselves, Alessandra felt a sense of peace she'd never experienced before. This was what surviving meant. Not just living through trauma, but using that survival to create something meaningful. Marco found her near closing time, Isabella asleep against her shoulder. Ready to go home? He asked. Almost. There's one more thing I want to do. She led him outside to where a small plaque had been mounted by the entrance. Marco read the inscription, and she saw tears gather in his eyes. Romano Castellano Community Development Center, built from the wreckage, transformed by love, dedicated to second chances. In memory of Flight 892, and in honor of all who survive. Alessandra. Marco's voice was thick with emotion. This is perfect, she finished. It's perfect, just like us. Not despite the wreckage, but because of it. We wouldn't be here, wouldn't have this, if we hadn't gone through everything we went through. Marco wrapped his arms around both his wife and his daughter, the three of them standing together in the fading October light. I love you, he said. I love both of you more than I have words to express. We love you too, Alessandra replied. All your parts, the darkness and the light, the mistakes and the redemption, all of it. They stood together for a moment longer, then turned toward their car and the home that was waiting for them. A home built on truth. A family built on love. A future built from the wreckage of what had almost been lost. Epilogue. 5 years after the crash, Isabella Castellano was 5 years old when her mother sat her down and told her the story of how sometimes the worst things that happen lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Once upon a time, Alessandra said, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. Your daddy made a terrible mistake because he was scared. He sent me away when he should have held me close. Why was he scared, Mama? Because he loved me so much, and he thought the only way to keep me safe was to push me away. But he learned something important, that love is stronger when you face scary things together instead of alone. Isabella frowned, processing this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster. Did you forgive him? Eventually. After he proved that he had learned his lesson. After he showed me every single day that I was the most important thing in his world. More important than work? Much more important than work. More important than anything? Alessandra smiled and pulled her daughter close. More important than anything, just like you are. Marco appeared in the doorway of Isabella's bedroom, having obviously been listening to the conversation. He crossed to the bed and scooped up his daughter, making her giggle. Time for bed, little one. Big day tomorrow. We're opening the second community center, remember? In New York, Isabella said excitedly. Can I cut the ribbon this time? Absolutely. You'll be the youngest ribbon cutter in history. As Marco tucked Isabella in and read her a bedtime story, Alessandra stood by the window, looking out at the city lights of Boston. She thought about the woman she'd been 7 years ago, boarding a plane, with a broken heart and no idea that she was about to face the most terrifying experience of her life. That woman would barely recognize who Alessandra had become. Stronger, fiercer, more certain of what she wanted and unwilling to accept less than she deserved. The crash had broken her, but she'd rebuilt herself into something better. And in the process, She'd helped Marco rebuild himself too. "She's asleep," Marco said, coming up behind Alessandra and wrapping his arms around her waist. Out like a light the moment her head hit the pillow. "She's excited about tomorrow." "So am I. 2 centers in 2 cities with plans for 3 more next year." "Alessandra, do you realize what we've built?" "We've built a legacy," she said. "Not just for Isabella, but for everyone whose lives we touch through the centers. That's real power, Marco. Not the kind you used to chase, but something better. Much better." He rested his chin on her shoulder, both of them looking out at the city. "Sometimes I think about that night at the airport. About what would have happened if I'd done things differently. What would you have done?" "I'd like to think I would have been brave enough to tell you the truth. To trust you with the danger instead of trying to handle it alone. But honestly, I don't know if I was capable of that level of trust back then." "You weren't," Alessandra said without judgment. "But you are now. That's what matters. The crash changed us both." "It did. But Marco, even if you had told me the truth that night, even if we'd faced the federal investigation together, we still would have had to do the hard work of rebuilding trust and learning to communicate. The crash just accelerated a process that was always going to be necessary." Marco turned her in his arms so he could see her face. "I thank God every day that you survived. That you gave me another chance. That we got to build this life together." "Me too." Alessandra touched his face, tracing the lines that had deepened over the past 5 years. "We've come so far from who we were. And we still have so far to go. Growing old together, watching Isabella grow up, maybe giving her a sibling someday." "Maybe," Alessandra agreed with a smile. "But whatever comes, we face it together. That's the promise we made, and it's one we're never breaking." They stood together in the quiet of their home, their daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, their future stretching out before them full of possibility and promise. The wreckage of what had been was long behind them. What lay ahead was everything they'd built from those broken pieces. A marriage forged in fire and tempered by truth. A love that had survived the unsurvivable. A family that proved second chances were worth fighting for. And somewhere in North Carolina, in a forest where a plane had once crashed and survivors had waited for rescue, new trees were growing. Life was returning to the scarred earth, transforming devastation into renewal, proving that even the most broken places could bloom again given time and care. Just like them. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.